The $2 Ranch. The sun, a molten coin, slipped beneath the ragged horizon, painting the sky in strokes of tangerine and bruised plum. Elias spurred his mare, Ruby, forward, the dust rising around them like a whispered secret. He'd left Martha at the cabin, promising to return before true darkness fell. The $2 Ranch, as he'd christened it in his mind, was a short ride, but the weight of his intentions felt heavier than any saddlebag. The ramshackle fence, a skeleton of splintered wood, appeared first, then the low-slung barn, its roof sagging like a weary sigh. A single, crooked lantern cast a weak, flickering glow from the small, unkempt cabin. Elias dismounted, the creak of his leather saddle a loud intrusion in the twilight hush. He wasn't sure what he'd find, or who. Martha had merely said, "There's a woman there. Been there for weeks, alone." He approached the cabin door, the dry earth crunching under his boots. A faint, earthy smell, like damp straw and wood smoke, hung in the air. He raised a hand, knuckles poised, then hesitated. What would he say? "Hello, I bought your ranch for $2 and a promise." Before he could knock, the door creaked open. A wisp of a woman stood framed in the dim light, her silhouette thin and fragile. Her hair, the color of dried wheat, hung in tangled ropes around her shoulders. Her eyes, large and shadowed, fixed on him with a mixture of fear and a flicker of something he couldn't quite decipher, perhaps a desperate hope. "Evening, ma'am," Elias said, his voice surprisingly gentle. "My name's Elias Thorne. I bought this place." Her gaze drifted past him, to Ruby, then back to his face. "Bought it?" she whispered, her voice a rustle of dry leaves. "Who, from?" "The bank. It was abandoned, ma'am. For back taxes." He felt a prickle of shame, as if he'd stolen it. "I didn't know anyone was living here." She clutched a threadbare shawl tighter around her. "I'm Alara," she said, her voice gaining a surprising, though still faint, firmness. "Alara Vance. I was sent here. As a bride." Elias's jaw tightened. "A mail-order bride?" She nodded, a slight dip of her head. "He never came. The man who sent for me. I waited. And waited." Her voice caught, a dry sob escaping her lips. "I've been here for months. Surviving." He looked around the desolate yard, at the forlorn cabin. "Surviving on what, Alara?" he asked, his voice low with concern. "A few roots. What little I could catch." She gestured vaguely towards the dark fields. "There's an old well, barely working." A wave of anger, cold and sharp, washed over Elias. He thought of Martha, warm and fed in his cabin. This woman, abandoned, starving, was another stark reminder of the brutality of this land. "You can't stay here," he said, his voice firmer than he intended. "It's not safe. Not like this." Her eyes, wide and luminous in the fading light, met his. "Where would I go, Mr. Thorne? I have nothing. No one." "You can come back with me," he said, the word surprising even himself. "My wife, Martha, she's a kind woman. We have food, shelter. You can stay with us, at least for a while. Until we figure things out." Alara stared at him, her gaze searching, as if trying to discern the truth behind his offer. The flicker of hope in her eyes intensified, battling with the deep-seated fear. "Your wife, she wouldn't mind?" "Martha's got a good heart," Elias assured her, a small, genuine smile touching his lips. "She'd want to help." He extended a hand towards her, a silent invitation. "Come on, Alara. We'll get you warm and fed." She looked at his outstretched hand, then back at the dark, empty cabin she had called home for so long. Slowly, hesitantly, she took his hand. Her fingers were cold, fragile, but surprisingly resilient. As she stepped out into the twilight, leaving the $2 ranch behind, Elias felt a strange, unexpected stirring in his chest. This abandoned land, bought for next to nothing, had already yielded something precious and profoundly human. A whimper in the shack. The wind, a banshee wailing its mournful song, clawed at the rickety walls of the shack, threatening to rip the weathered boards from their fragile hold. Inside, the gloom was absolute, broken only by the anemic flicker of a single, sputtering candle. Elias, his broad shoulders hunched, poured lukewarm coffee into 2 chipped tin mugs. The silence, save for the wind's relentless assault, was thick and heavy, a palpable thing between him and the woman huddled on the makeshift cot. He pushed a mug towards her, the metal clinking softly against the rough-hewn table. "Drink this, ma'am. It'll warm you." Elara, her eyes sunken and shadowed, didn't look up. Her hands, skeletal and trembling, were clasped tightly in her lap. He'd seen fear before, in men facing down a charging bull, in outlaws cornered by the law. But this was different. This was a fear so profound it had hollowed her out, leaving only a fragile shell. I don't understand," she finally whispered, her voice a reedy rasp. "Where am I? Who are you?" Elias sighed, running a hand over his stubbled jaw. "You're on my ranch, ma'am. Bought it a few weeks back. Name's Elias Thorne." He paused, searching for the right words. "You were here when I arrived." Her head snapped up then, her gaze, though still wary, holding a spark of something new, confusion, perhaps, or a nascent flicker of hope. "Here? But I was waiting. For him." "For who, ma'am?" "My husband," she breathed, the word tasting like ash on her tongue. "The one who sent for me. From the advertisement." Her eyes widened, a dawning horror stealing over her face. He never came, did he?" The truth hung in the air, a bitter fog. Elias felt a pang of something akin to shame, though it wasn't his to bear. "No, ma'am. He didn't." He watched her carefully, anticipating the inevitable breakdown. Instead, a chilling quiet settled over her. It was worse than tears, a fragile stillness that suggested a spirit stretched to its very breaking point. "I'm sorry," he offered, the words feeling utterly inadequate. A low sound, barely audible above the wind, escaped her lips. It was a whimper, a pained, animalistic sound that tore at something deep within Elias. It wasn't the loud, desperate cry of a woman betrayed, but the faint, almost imperceptible gasp of someone whose wellspring of tears had long since run dry. He moved closer, pulling up a crude stool. "You've been through a lot. But you're safe now, Elara." He tried to infuse his voice with a calm assurance he didn't quite feel. "There's food. A proper bed in the main house once we get the stove going. You don't have to be afraid." She finally met his gaze, and for a fleeting moment, he saw not just fear, but a flicker of something raw and unyielding. Survival. The spark of a fight not yet extinguished. I haven't eaten in days," she admitted, her voice stronger now, though still hoarse. "Then let's fix that," Elias said, a plan solidifying in his mind. "We'll get you warm, get some food in you. And then we'll figure out what comes next." The ranch was a mess, his own life a tangle of uncertainties, but seeing her, broken and abandoned, had ignited a surprising resolve within him. He wouldn't leave her to the mercy of the elements, or the cruel indifference of a man who had left her to starve. First steps to a home. The scent of dust and faint mildew hung in the air, a stark contrast to the crisp mountain breeze that had followed him here. Nathan stood in the main room of the ranch house, the afternoon sun streaming through grimy windows, illuminating motes dancing in the stillness. A thin, worn blanket, the same one he'd used to cover Elara, lay folded on the floor, testament to her quiet departure. He ran a hand over the rough-hewn timber of the wall, a phantom warmth lingering from where she'd rested. His initial plan had been simple, secure the deed, assess the land, and decide whether to resell or attempt to rebuild. Elara, however, had complicated everything. Her quiet resilience, the raw vulnerability in her eyes when she thought he wasn't looking, had chipped away at his pragmatic resolve. He wasn't a man to leave a soul stranded, especially not one so clearly in need. He walked into the kitchen, a space dominated by a heavy cast-iron stove, cold and cobwebbed. A single, chipped plate and a rusty fork sat on the counter, remnants of a life suspended. He imagined her, a young woman, attempting to make a home here, alone, desperate. A knot tightened in his stomach. Decisions needed to be made. He pulled a worn ledger from his saddlebag, uncapped his inkwell, and began to list. First, the immediate necessities: food, fresh water, and basic medical supplies for Elara. Then, repairs: the roof, a sagging porch beam, a broken windowpane. The list grew, each item a small investment into a future he hadn't planned for. A soft knock startled him, making him drop his pen. Elara stood in the doorway, clutching a small, bundled cloth. Her usually pale cheeks held a faint flush, and her eyes, though still shadowed, held a spark of something akin to purpose. "Mr. Hayes," she began, her voice a little stronger than before. I found some things. Out by the creek bed." She unfolded the cloth, revealing a handful of smooth, river-polished stones, a few vibrant feathers, and a small, tarnished silver locket. "They're not much, but perhaps they could be cleaned. Or traded." Nathan's gaze softened. It wasn't about the monetary value of her findings, but the gesture. She wasn't asking for help, she was offering to contribute. "Elara," he said, pushing aside the ledger. "You don't need to find things to trade. Not right now. We need to get you well." She looked down, a shadow falling over her face. "I don't want to be a burden." "You're not a burden," he insisted, walking closer. "You're an occupant. And soon, a resident." He gestured vaguely around the dusty room. "This place needs a lot of work. More than one pair of hands can manage." He paused, weighing his words. "I'm staying. For now. And I need help. Someone to look after the house, while I look after the land. If you're willing." Elara's head snapped up, her eyes wide with a mixture of hope and disbelief. "You mean, you want me to stay?" "I do," Nathan affirmed, a strange sense of rightness settling over him. "It won't be easy, Elara. But we'll make a home here. Together." A faint, tremulous smile touched her lips, the first genuine smile he'd seen. She clutched the bundle of trinkets to her chest. I'll do my best, Mr. Hayes." "Nathan," he corrected softly. "And I'll do mine, Elara." The first step was taken. A fragile alliance formed in the heart of a forgotten ranch. Water and whispers. The scent of damp earth and something sweet, like honeysuckle, hung heavy in the air as Silas guided his mare, Juniper, towards the creek. His boots squelched softly with each step, the morning dew still clinging to the tall grasses. He carried 2 tin buckets, their clanking a small rhythm against the vast silence of the ranch. He'd seen Amelia at the well earlier, her back straight, the bucket she hauled seeming almost too heavy for her slender frame. A pang, not of pity but of something akin to admiration, had tightened in his chest. Reaching the bank, he dipped the buckets, watching the clear water swirl and then settle, reflecting the pale morning sky. A faint ripple caught his eye. He looked up, his gaze sweeping the opposite bank, and there she was. Amelia, her hair loose, shimmering like spun copper in the nascent sunlight. She knelt, not at the creek's edge, but a few feet back, near a thicket of willows, her hands cupped, a tiny stream of water trickling into them from a hidden spring. She hadn't seen him. He watched for a moment, the quiet grace of her movements, the way her shoulders relaxed as she drank. It was a private moment, one he felt almost guilty for witnessing. He cleared his throat, a soft rumble, and she started, her head snapping up, eyes wide and startled like a deer. "Mornin'," he offered, his voice a low drawl. She didn't reply immediately, her hand still hovering near her lips. Her gaze, initially wary, softened slightly as she recognized him. "Good morning, Mr. Thorne." Her voice was a whisper, as soft as the rustling leaves above them. "Just Silas," he corrected, pulling the filled buckets onto the bank. "That's a spring, isn't it? Good water." She nodded, pushing a stray strand of hair behind her ear. "My grandmother taught me how to find them. Better than the well water, sometimes. Cooler." She hesitated, then added, "Cleaner, usually." A shared silence settled, broken only by the chirping of crickets. He wanted to ask her about her grandmother, about the life she'd left behind, but held his tongue. Instead, he gestured vaguely towards the ranch house. "Breakfast soon. Coffee's on." She rose, dusting off her simple calico skirt. "Thank you. I appreciate the offer." Her eyes, a startling shade of green, met his for a brief moment, then darted away. There was a flicker of something in them, gratitude, perhaps, but also a weariness that tugged at him. "You're welcome to it," he said, turning to hoist the buckets. The weight felt different today, heavier, yet somehow less burdensome. As he walked away, he could feel her gaze on his back. He didn't look around, but a curious warmth spread through him, a feeling he hadn't known since he was a boy. He thought of the spring, hidden and pure, a secret in the wild, just like the whispers that now seemed to follow Amelia wherever she went. The ranch, once a place of stark solitude, was beginning to hum with an unfamiliar undercurrent. The cowboy challenge. The dust, fine as flour, coated everything, making the air thick and tasting of sun-baked earth and horse sweat. Silas tightened the cinch on midnight, his movements practiced and efficient. Across the corral, a low murmur rippled through the gathered onlookers, their shadows long and distorted in the late afternoon light. The cowboy challenge, as Old Man Hemlock had dubbed it, was about to begin. "You sure about this, Silas?" Martha's voice, a little breathless, cut through the din. She stood beside him, her apron clean despite the pervasive dust, a testament to her meticulous nature. "That's a lot of money to be wagering." He glanced at her, a wry smile touching his lips. "It's about more than money, Martha. It's about respect. And about proving to himself, and to the town, that he wasn't just some greenhorn who'd stumbled into ranching." He thought of the half-built barn, the struggling cattle, the constant battle against the elements. This challenge, a series of traditional cowboy contests, steer roping, barrel racing, and finally, a bareback bronc ride, was his chance to earn the capital he desperately needed to make a go of the $2 ranch. And maybe, just maybe, to solidify his place in Martha's eyes. "Just try not to break your neck," she muttered, a hint of genuine concern in her tone. The first event, steer roping, went surprisingly well. Silas had spent weeks practicing, the lasso a fluid extension of his arm. He heard the cheers, a welcome sound after the silence of his solitary efforts. He caught 3 steers in quick succession, placing him solidly in the top 3. The barrel racing, however, was a different beast. Midnight, usually nimble, seemed to hesitate, her hooves kicking up clouds of dirt as they clipped the final barrel. He finished with a respectable, though not winning, time. Now, only the bronc ride remained. The air crackled with anticipation. The bucking chute, a sturdy wooden cage, held a roan mare with wild eyes and a reputation for unseating even the most seasoned riders. Her snorts echoed, a defiant challenge. Silas took a deep breath, the scent of nervous horse and fresh wood shavings filling his nostrils. He swung himself onto the mare's back, her muscles tense beneath him. The cold leather of the rein felt slick in his grip. He heard the gate creak open, and then, chaos. The mare exploded from the chute, a whirlwind of muscle and fury. She twisted, bucked, and spun, trying to dislodge him. Silas gripped with his knees, his body moving with her violent rhythm, a dance of survival. The roar of the crowd was a distant hum in his ears. He focused, his gaze fixed on the mare's powerful neck, his mind a blank slate save for the primal urge to hold on. A sharp jolt, a sudden twist, and he felt himself losing balance, his body arching backward. For a terrifying second, he saw the dusty ground rushing up to meet him. Then, just as quickly, he found his center again, pulling himself back, his hand grasping the rein with renewed desperation. He held on, teeth gritted, for what felt like an eternity, but was only a few more frantic seconds. The whistle blew, a shrill sound announcing the end of his 8 seconds. He tumbled to the ground, landing with a jarring thud, but he was up almost instantly, a triumphant grin splitting his dust-streaked face. Martha was there, her hands on his arms, her eyes wide with a mixture of relief and admiration. "You did it, Silas. You actually did it." He laughed, a genuine, booming sound that surprised even himself. "Looks like the $2 ranch just earned itself some much-needed capital." He looked past her, scanning the crowd, and caught Old Man Hemlock's gaze. The old rancher, usually stoic, gave a slow, approving nod. The challenge was won, and with it, a new sense of belonging settled over Silas. Building a real cabin. The crisp morning air bit at Elias's cheeks as he surveyed the stand of ponderosa pines. "These'll do," he grunted, hefting the double-bladed felling axe. Sarah, her sleeves rolled up to reveal surprisingly strong forearms, knelt by a fallen log, already stripping bark with a drawknife. A faint scent of pine resin and damp earth hung in the air, a natural perfume that seemed to invigorate them both. They worked in a rhythm born of necessity and growing understanding. Elias, a whirlwind of powerful swings, dropped trees with practiced efficiency, the thud of their impact echoing through the valley. Sarah, methodical and precise, limbed and debarked, her movements economical and surprisingly swift. Sweat soon beaded on Elias's brow, a stark contrast to the persistent chill, and he paused to wipe it with the back of a calloused hand. "You're a natural with that," he remarked, watching her peel a long strip of bark cleanly from a log. She looked up, a smudge of dirt on her nose, and offered a small, tired smile. "My pa taught me a thing or two. Said a woman should be able to fend for herself, even if she married a city man." A shadow briefly crossed her features before she returned to her task. By midday, a respectable pile of stripped logs lay ready. The physical exertion, while draining, also felt strangely exhilarating. Elias, however, noticed the slight tremor in Sarah's hands as she set down her knife. "We'll haul them down to the site after a bite," he announced, steering her towards their meager lunch of dried venison and hardtack. He could see the fatigue etched around her eyes, a testament to her unyielding effort. The afternoon was spent dragging the heavy logs across the uneven terrain to the flat ground near the creek, the chosen site for their new home. Elias fashioned a simple sledge from a few smaller timbers, making the task less arduous but still backbreaking. With each log laid, the faint outline of a cabin began to emerge from the wilderness, a tangible symbol of their shared endeavor. The sun dipped low, painting the sky in fiery hues of orange and purple, casting long, dancing shadows. As dusk settled, a new challenge presented itself. "We'll need to notch these," Elias explained, gesturing to the corner where 2 logs met. "Otherwise, the walls won't be sturdy." He demonstrated a basic saddle notch, the axe blade biting into the wood with a satisfying thunk. Sarah watched intently, then picked up a smaller hatchet. She was slower, less powerful, but her cuts were surprisingly clean, guided by a focused determination that impressed him. "You're learning quick," he complimented, his voice rough with fatigue but genuine. She merely nodded, her breath puffing out in small clouds in the cooling air. The work stretched into the twilight, illuminated by the flickering light of a lantern Elias had retrieved from the ranch house. The rhythmic sounds of their tools, the faint crackle of their small fire, and the distant hoot of an owl filled the quiet valley. The tension between them, once a tangible barrier, seemed to soften with each shared swing of an axe, each perfectly fitted log. They were building more than a cabin, they were laying the foundation for something entirely new. Winter's fury. The wind howled a mournful dirge, a sound that had become a constant companion since the first snows of October had yielded to the deeper, more relentless drifts of December. Elias shivered, not from the cold that gnawed at the cabin's chinks, but from the raw loneliness that seemed to press in from all sides. He hadn't spoken a word aloud in days, not since he'd last ventured to the barn to check on the few scrawny chickens and the 2 horses he'd inherited with the ranch. Ilara sat by the hearth, a mended quilt draped over her shoulders, her hands busy with a piece of embroidery, a sprig of wild roses, rendered in surprisingly vibrant threads. The silence between them was thick, not hostile, but heavy with unspoken things. He glanced at her, noting the slight tremor in her hands, the way her gaze kept flicking towards the window where the world beyond was a blur of white. "We're running low on kindling," she said, her voice soft, a fragile thing against the wind's fury. It was the first time she'd spoken in hours. Elias nodded, pushing himself up from the worn armchair. "I'll head out. There's a stand of deadfall by the creek." He pulled on his heavy coat, the one he'd bought in town before this whole improbable adventure began. The sight of it brought a fresh wave of unease. He'd come here for solitude, for a chance to rebuild something from nothing. He hadn't expected a ghost in a wedding dress, let alone a living, breathing woman whose presence complicated everything. Outside, the air hit him like a physical blow, stripping the warmth from his bones instantly. Snow swirled, a dizzying dance of white, obscuring the path to the creek. He squinted, trying to discern the familiar landmarks, but the blizzard had intensified, erasing the world as he knew it. He pushed forward, each step a struggle through the deepening drifts. The cold bit at his exposed skin, turning his fingers numb inside his thin gloves. He stumbled, falling knee-deep into a drift, the sudden immersion a shock to his system. As he pulled himself free, he noticed a faint, almost imperceptible gleam in the snow, a discarded trap, half buried, its jaws glinting wickedly. A chill colder than the wind traced its way down his spine. He remembered the stories in town, whispers of old grudges, of land disputes that ran deeper than the river. Back at the cabin, Ilara watched him struggle through the door, powdered snow clinging to his eyelashes, his breath coming in ragged gasps. He dropped the armload of wood with a thud. "The creek, it's a whiteout," he managed, stamping his feet. "And I found something." He described the trap, the way it had been hidden. Ilara's eyes widened, a flicker of fear in their depths. "Someone's still out there," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Someone who doesn't want us here." He looked at her, at the way her shoulders hunched against the unseen threat. "We'll be careful," he said, trying to infuse his voice with a confidence he didn't entirely feel. "We'll weather this storm, Ilara. Together." She met his gaze, and for the first time, he saw not just fear, but a flicker of resolve. The blizzard raged on, a monstrous entity testing their fragile hold on this desolate ranch, but in the small cabin, a different kind of warmth, tenuous yet hopeful, began to grow. A helping hand. The scent of pine and damp earth clung to the air as Eli led the way to the stream. He kept his stride measured, aware of Ilara's shorter legs following behind. The silence between them wasn't uncomfortable, but thick with the unspoken. He'd seen the worry etched around her eyes, the slight tremble in her hands as she'd gathered a few dried herbs from a saddlebag that morning. "Here," Eli said, stopping at a wide, shallow part of the creek where the water gurgled over smooth stones. He knelt, scooping handfuls of the clear liquid, splashing it over his face. The cold shock woke him more effectively than any coffee. "It's good for washing." Ilara nodded, her gaze fixed on the rushing water. He watched her for a moment, then began to gather larger stones, arranging them into a makeshift basin. The sun, already climbing, sent dappled light through the overhead canopy, painting shifting patterns on the creek bed. Are you, well? Eli finally asked, his voice softer than he intended. She flinched slightly, then met his eyes. As well as can be expected, I suppose. The fever is gone, thanks to your care. Her voice was a low murmur, a stark contrast to the lively birdsong around them. But the cough lingers. She paused, then added, and the memories. Eli grunted. He knew a thing or two about lingering memories. He picked up a smooth, flat stone and began to scrub at the grime on his hands. We'll get you stronger. And then, well, then we'll figure things out. Ilara moved closer to the stream's edge, dipping her own hands into the icy water. The chill made her shiver, but she persevered, carefully cleaning her face. Her skin, pale beneath the grime, seemed almost translucent. Eli noticed the faint scars on her wrists, half hidden by her sleeves, and a tightness settled in his gut. He knew, without asking, that the journey here had been far more than just long. Later, as they walked back towards the cabin, Eli spotted a patch of wild onions poking through the leaf litter. He paused, digging them up with his knife. These'll add some flavor to our stew tonight. And some nutrients. Ilara watched him, a flicker of something unreadable in her eyes. You seem to know a great deal about the land. Been living off it a long time, he replied, straightening up, a handful of pungent greens in his hand. He glanced at her, then offered, You want to learn? I can show you what's good to eat, what'll kill you. A small, hesitant smile touched her lips. It was the first genuine smile he'd seen since she'd woken. I would like that very much, Eli. Thank you. The simple gratitude in her voice was a warmth against the cool morning air. He saw not just a helpless woman, but a glimmer of resilience, a spark waiting to be fanned. Perhaps, he thought, a helping hand wasn't just for her. Perhaps it was for him too. The ranch, once a lonely expanse, felt a little less empty with her quiet presence. The silence now held a promise, not just an echo. As they neared the cabin, the scent of the slowly simmering stew, prepared earlier, offered a comforting welcome, a small beacon of normalcy in their strange new life. Home, sweet home. The air, redolent with stale dust and a faint, desiccated floral note, like forgotten potpourri in a long-shuttered drawer, enveloped Josiah the moment he nudged open the warped front door of the ranch house. Sunbeams, thick with dancing motes, sliced through grime-streaked windows, spotlighting a tableau of quiet decay. A single rocking chair, its paint flaking like sun-scalded skin, sat askew in what served as the living room. This was a stark contrast to the grand vision he'd harbored, a dream kindled by $2 and a desperate yearning for a fresh start. Well, this is rustic, he murmured, his voice absorbed by the profound stillness. He stepped inside, his boots echoing softly on the bare floorboards. A fine film of grit veiled every surface. The air, cool and metallic, carried the faint tang of an unused stove. This, then, was home, or at least its skeletal remains. He moved through the house with a practiced eye, assessing the neglect. The kitchen lay in ruins, shattered crockery and rodent droppings. The bedroom, however, held a peculiar tidiness, a small bastion of order amidst the disarray. A worn quilt lay neatly folded at the foot of an iron frame bed, and a solitary, chipped ceramic doll occupied a wooden dresser. It was then he saw it, a subtle shift beneath the quilt. Josiah froze, his hand instinctively gravitating to the worn Colt holstered at his hip. He'd braced himself for desolation, not occupancy. He stood motionless, breath held, straining to hear. A soft whimper, barely discernible, confirmed his apprehension. "Hello?" he called out, his voice surprisingly steady. "Anyone here?" The quilt stirred again, and a small, gaunt face emerged, eyes wide with terror, framed by a tangle of dark hair. She was a woman, no older than his own 25 years, yet her face was etched with a profound weariness that added decades. Her skin, pale to the point of translucence, was marred by cracked lips. Who are you?" she whispered, her voice a dry rasp, barely a breath. Josiah slowly lowered his hand from his firearm. "My name's Josiah. Josiah Bell. I bought this ranch." He gestured vaguely around the room. $2. It's mine now." Her eyes, a startling green against her pallor, flickered from him to the room, then back again. A flicker of something, fear, confusion, perhaps even a sliver of defiance, crossed her features. "Bought it," she repeated, as if the words themselves were alien. "But I live here." The statement hung in the air, dense with unspoken questions and undeniable truths. Josiah felt a flush creep up his neck. This was not in the prospectus. This was certainly not part of the $2 bargain. "You live here?" he asked, the words emerging as more of a croak than he intended. "My name is Alara," she said, her voice gaining a fraction of its strength. She pulled the quilt tighter around herself, a defensive gesture. "My pa, he left me here. Said he'd be back." Her gaze dropped to the floorboards. "That was a long time ago." Josiah stared at her, the realization dawning on him with the cold shock of an unexpected winter storm. An abandoned bride, starving and alone. He had purchased a ranch, only to inherit a ghost. A living, breathing, desperately hungry ghost. The silence stretched between them, heavy with the weight of their impossible circumstances, the sun now casting long, accusatory shadows across the dusty floor.